Welcome to the always fun and exciting conference committee between Senate and House Ed. We are here to conference on Senate Bill 438, which was initially about the AOK program. So with that, I would like to start with considering the addition of House Bill 2645 as amended by the Senate to be placed in that bill. And with that, discussion. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let's just go ahead and have the revisers briefly make sure everyone knows what currently is residing in House Bill 2645.
Thank you, Chairs. House Bill 2645 contains two scholarship programs. One is the Kansas Nursing Service Scholarship Program, and the other is the Heroes Scholarship Program. The Nursing Scholarship Program that passed the House is the same as what is currently in 2645 and was passed out of the Senate committee. There is a slight difference in the Heroes Scholarship Program for the eligibility criteria from what passed out of the House to what passed out of the Senate. In the House version, the criteria includes the person died serving in military service, sustained an injury or disability that rendered the service member incapable of continuing their service, or is entitled to compensation from the Department of Veterans Affairs for a disability of at least 80%. In the Senate version, they took out that second piece, the sustained an injury or disability. So the only two criteria in the Senate version are died serving in military service and the 80% disability. And that is currently what is in House Bill 2645.
Discussion. Representative Estes.
If memory serves, this bill was first brought to us by the Board of Regents to clarify a situation where someone asked for the scholarship and the Board of Regents needed a little bit more clarity. So I think it's important to keep the House language on this bill.
Further discussion? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the Senate would like a few moments to discuss. The language that we had put in was based on what is with the Veterans Affairs language. That is why we put that in there. Or essentially why we struck item 4 from yours.
Representative Estes.
So that's that middle section that we have that you don't have is the new language, because the Heroes Bill, once we started it on its journey 4 years ago, adding in the 80% disability was what we did 4 years ago. it's my recollection that the Board of Regents had a situation last year and they needed a stronger litmus test of relating to that 80%. And for them, having it, if having it such that you had to stop created that clearer litmus test for them that they needed.
Thank you.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the Senate side, I believe our concern was with that language, it was maybe unclear if the injury was sustained on the job as being a veteran or in military service, or if it was an accident, in a car accident or something that would not. So we were trying to tie it to the service.
Representative Estes.
And I think that's why sustained an injury or disability that rendered the service member incapable of continuing. Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I just know that's what I recall being asked for by the Board of Regents. So, because the situation that brought this to light was someone died of a heart attack after they were out of the service. So they wanted to connect it to the service by what happened. You couldn't continue anymore. And I think the line above died serving in military service. I think we're all trying to get to the same place, but it's a little, I don't know if we could, or if we could add sustained an injury or disability in the line of duty that rendered the service member incapable of continuing such service members' military service, because the person who died of the heart attack did so after they had left the military.
Senator Baumgartner.
So would you be amenable to language that said sustained an injury or disability that rendered in the line of service or in military service?
Or due to military service.
So just to be clear, so you're saying sustained an injury or disability while in the line of duty, or due to service.
I would be concerned that due to service opens up the idea that stress caused a heart attack later. Or, because I think this was really meant to be an injury while in line of service and not a broad range of medical conditions. So I'd be most comfortable with sustained an injury or disability in the line of in military service, or something along that line.
Senator Baumgartner.
We do have that written in military service.
Representative Estes.
I think service related might be the phrase that we're looking for.
Sustained a service related
injury or disability.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was merely mirroring the qualifier in died serving in military service, but I would defer to the reviser as to what language captures what we are all trying to get at.
Thank you. I think there is a slight difference in the terminology. So a service-connected injury, I think, would be an injury that is suffered while performing an official duty of your military service, whereas an injury suffered while in military service is a broader category. So it's sort of up to you which you'd prefer, but I think that's the difference.
Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that our service people are covered while serving. That, you know, if they have an accident in San Diego, they're in San Diego because of their military service. And if that happens, then they should be covered by this. And I think if you go just while serving in a military capacity, that might leave those people out that might have had a wreck that wasn't their fault, downtown San Diego, that sort of thing. So I think it needs to be while in service.
Senator Sykes.
Tamara, so would you suggest a sustained a service connected injury or disability that rendered? Is that where you would put that after sustained?
If the committee wants to use service connected, then yes, it would be sustained a service connected injury or disability. However, if the committee wants to use while in military service, that would be sustained an injury or disability while in military service that rendered the service member incapable.
Representative Stogsdill.
Yeah, again, having served in that capacity, that I think that you know, you're on military service 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And if something happens to you outside of the base or on an op, that sort of thing, that should still be covered.
Representative Estes.
Well, I appreciate the point. When I think about how this bill started, it came into existence, I believe, as far back as World War II, possibly earlier, and it was survivor benefits. And then after 9/11, it was we added EMS and first responders, and then but it was always injuries or death in the line of duty, like directly related to that. And I'm afraid of what would happen if we opened it too much right now.
All right, Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of those comments, I think that we need to have that language that our reviser Tamara had shared with us, where you indicated sustained, service connected.
Okay, so I want to make sure we get this right. So section 4 then say sustained an injury or disability. No. Tamara, go ahead and read it, please.
Sustained a service connected injury or disability that rendered the service member incapable of continuing such service member's military service.
Very good. Could you read that one more time for us, Tamara?
Sustained a service connected injury or disability that rendered the service member incapable of continuing such service member's military service.
Very good. Representative Stogsdill.
Yeah, I still think this is the way it's written here. It depends on your definition of service. And as I say, when you're on active duty, you're in service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So I think that's going to leave things up to interpretation.
Very good. Any further discussion? All right, very good. So let's move on.
Chair.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we have added nursing scholarship, heroes scholarship. We would like to add the language that was passed 40-0 from Senate Bill 544 That is establishing a scholarship, and let me just pull it up real quickly. It is, but we have renamed that to the Kansas Education Opportunity Scholarship Program. In the legislature in 1989 created the Kansas Ethnic Minority Scholarship Program. And with the recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling, the concern is that that is something that would be illegal. And so the Kansas Education Opportunity Scholarship Program allows a student that is either a first generation student or their parent or guardian are employed as a pre-K through 12th grade teacher in Kansas. Those would be the two groups that would be eligible for the scholarship. So we would like to add that language to this as well.
Very good discussion. All right, we accept that. Further discussion? Senator Baumgartner?
So we would like to hear your conversation with regard to the Emerge Scholarship that you passed out, House Bill 2567. You passed it and voted 114 to 5 in favor of that. Could you share with us that particular scholarship? Okay, so you are not interested in adding that one at this time?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. So at this time, I would like to open up discussion on the Kansas Blueprint Bill. That would be Senate Bill 532. And we understand that you did pass out amendments on your side. So I would like us to discuss the differences where we are as far as amendments. We did put some significant amendments in as well that did pass out 35 to 3 in the Senate.
All right, Tamara, could you briefly kind of go through what the Senate amendments were on 532 on the Senate side, and then we'll kind of go over what we did on the House side, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the Senate actually had a number of amendments that your committee also had. So what this chart that you have in front of you is really just the differences. So I can walk through what the Senate did, or I can just do the differences. You let me know.
Just do the differences if we could, please.
Sounds good. So section 1 was the same. In section 2 has to do with the Literacy Advisory Committee and also contains the transformational goal. In the Senate version, the goal is to have at least 50% or more of 3rd through 8th graders achieving level 3 or above, and at least 85% of 3rd through 8th graders achieving level 2 or above on the English Language Arts State Assessment by 2033. In the House version, that goal is 75% or more of 3rd through 8th graders achieving level 3 or above, and at least 90% of 3rd through 8th graders achieving upper level 2 or above on the English language assessment by 2033. The other difference in section 2 has to do with the reports. The underlying bill already requires a report to be submitted to the State Board of Regents on the establishment of the Centers for Excellence in Reading. The House version of the bill also requires that report to be submitted to the legislature. The Senate report The Senate also requires an additional report to the legislature 3 times per calendar year on the English language state assessment progress, and that it also includes the progress based on various subgroups. Section 3 of the bill is the same. In Section 4, there is already a requirement in the underlying bill for the State Board of Regents to develop a comprehensive reading and literacy assessment system. That is those diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments that are to be used in teacher preparation programs. That is the same in both bills. The difference is in the House version of the bill, there is a statement that nothing in the paragraph shall be construed to include the English language arts statewide assessment. So it's drawing a clear line between those diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments and the statewide assessments. And in the Senate version, it does state that on or before July 1, 2025, no school district would use any textbooks or instructional materials that utilize the 3 cueing system, visual memory as a primary basis for teaching word recognition, or reading based on meaning, structure, and syntax and visual clues. Everything else in the bills is the same.
Very good. Thank you for that. I want to start with Section 2. The state board, they did mention they were considering lowering this, but the goal of 75% or more of 3rd through 8th graders achieving level 3 and above, again, not a requirement, just a goal. That was language we took straight from the state board's position, number one. And then the 90% of 3rd through 8th graders achieving upper level 2 or above. We got that breakdown. I'm sure you all saw it where it had the different tiers, level 1, high level 1, level 2, high level 2, and so on and so forth. And we believe looking at 85%, which is the original language of 3rd and 8th graders achieving level 2 or above, we viewed that as about only a 4% improvement between now and 2033. So we wanted to set the goals a little bit higher for the simple fact that we don't want to set the goals low enough to where, we're not continuing to push for better results and getting our students better at reading. So that is why we decided on the House side to set that goal at 90% upper level 2, because some arguments are made that on one side, level 2 all across the board is proficient. Others argue that you don't reach true proficiency until level 3. So we viewed this on our end as a compromise and saying we want 90% at upper level 2 or above. So that was our House position. So what thoughts do you all have on that? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, part of our thoughts were with the 50% or more of 3rd through 8th graders, and we meant for each grade, not the average. We were using the bell curve on that. And that's how we came up with 50% or above. Now, with regard to the 75%, I understand where you're coming from, but the fact of the matter is when you look at the state assessments and where we are on the assessments, it's only the 4th grade. The 4th grade is the odd man out on the state assessments. And that's where you're seeing 4th graders actually achieving up to 81%. But if you look at all of the other grades, if you look at the 3rd grade before and every grade after, they're significantly lower. And again, that was what we were looking at with regard to that. We did also add that reporting, that a report would come to the legislature 3 times per calendar year. And so the conversation on that would be, the first report would be at the start of the legislative session. Second report would be, so that would occur in January. Second report would occur in April or May. And then the third report would be during any education interim session. And we know between now and the next 4 years, while we're working on a new funding formula, there are going to continue to be interim sessions. And the thought was, when we just get that quick dip of reporting once a year, that's not sufficient. And so I see that is very much in keeping with part of that requirement that you put in with regard to the legislature on the Centers for Excellence. So we would want the legislature to receive that as well. but we feel that reporting should be more, our preference would be 4 times a year, but knowing when the legislature is going to be here 4 times, it seemed a little problematic, but we were comfortable with the 3 times. So I am a little curious with the 75%, knowing where we are right now on assessments, how likely do you feel, we're not talking about a statewide average, but we're talking individual grade average. How likely do you feel that we would ever come close to that 75%? I'm a little curious on that.
Representative Vestas.
Let me jump to the reports. I don't think what we have is incompatible because ours was about just the reading centers. And I like what you guys had on the bottom. And I think we could keep both of those. Now, to go back to what you originally asked me about on the transformational goals. Yes, the other grades are lower, but this is the first year that we are starting to see the benefit really pay off. And that third grade class is going to move along. And that's why I felt it was important to have that be higher. And I think that higher goal is very much achievable. I did some number crunching, and there was a time that this is math, not reading it, but I can't remember where we were in reading. But 2007, we were the 4th highest state in the nation in math. I have a lot of confidence in our teachers and in our students, and I believe that that's doable. And for the amount of money that we would be spending, I think we need to reach for our best. And it's not like there's a penalty there if they don't hit it, but I think it's important that we have a high threshold because that goes along with transformational.
Senator Bumgarner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, sorry. So I'm looking at 2023 numbers, and I'm looking at 8th grade, and it shows in level 3 and level 4, that's at 21%. And for level 2, it's at 42%. Did you get a breakdown as far as what would constitute the upper level 2 for, as an example, that 42%? On average, is the upper level half of what is level 2?
Representative Vestas.
I don't have those records with me.
We do have the report. I can get that to you.
And I think some of it, if you will, Mr. Chair, some of what becomes complicated is I don't want to see what is the criteria that the Department of Education is using to determine what is upper level of any of the levels.
Representative Vestas.
So they showed us their post-secondary success report, and there was a version of that broke out how a low 1 does and a high 1 and a low 2 and a high 2, low 3, high 3, low 4, high 4. And there was a significant change, and I spoke to the Department of Education and verified that that's a split at 50%, the 50% point. And the outcomes and the amount of students who are a high 2 who go on to achieve something post-secondary and their ACT scores were different enough to me that I really preferred to count academically proficient. But that's why I was open to compromising on a high 2, because there is a big difference in the future that those children have versus the ones in the low 2.
Senator Bumgarner.
Thank you. So, and we can phone a friend if someone from the Department of Ed wants to fill us in. But when you say 50%, are you talking about, so if there are 2,000 students, so it's the cutoff 1,000 scores are below and 1,000 are above? Or is it actually the range in what the score is in the midway point between that range of what the cutoff is for 2 versus the cutoff of 3?
They said the upper 50%.
So it's the midpoint of the scores of the range. Okay.
Any further discussion?
I think let's go ahead and we will meet briefly and get back so that we can move on because it appears that we're the same on section 1 and section 3. So let's.
Very good.
Much, Mr. Chair. All along the way, as we are working on crafting what will be law in our state, trust is an issue. And we know specifically where level 3, level 4 are on the cut lines, so that there continues to be a level of trust. We are more comfortable that at least 50% or more of 3rd through 8th graders achieve level 3 or above. But we would like to change, and at least 90% of 3rd through 8th graders are achieving level 2 or above, rather than, it's interesting because parents would receive notification your child is in level 2. I don't know that the parent is receiving your child is in low level 2 or high level 2. And so I think if we're really looking at a target, what I don't want to see happen is, unless we're going to make 5 levels, uh, I, I want it to be very clear. The goal is to move kids to level 3 and level 4 and to move them up out of level 2, not knowing what that level 2 is, knowing that that's not necessarily going to be shared with parents. Um, our preference is, again, the 50%, but change the second number to the 90%, which is what you have.
All right. Give us just a sec. discussion, the House is okay with that 90% achieving level 2 or higher. We're willing to adopt that change, and appreciate the compromise on the rest. Representative Stocksdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an ongoing concern of mine. This part which says, submit a report to the legislature 3 times per calendar year on ELA state assessment progress. And then again on the back, this will be on section 4. We haven't gotten to it yet, but it says on or before July 1st, 2025, no school district shall use any of the textbooks, instructional materials, and so on. I see this as an ongoing problem for me in the fact that we are putting into law what we can accomplish with a phone call to the State Board of Education. This is my 8th year on the House Education Committee. I don't remember one single time when we have requested information from the State Board of Education and it wasn't almost immediately forthcoming. So I think to put this kind of language into law usurps the rights and responsibilities of the Kansas State Board of Education, and I would be totally against that because I think, we're elected to do a certain job. They're elected by the same people to do a certain job, and I just think this is an overreach from the legislature and taking rights and responsibilities away from the state board and trying to place those in the legislature.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you. I'm just going to respond a little bit as far as we're not taking any authority away when we codify things into law. By codifying into law later in this bill with regard to textbooks or instructional materials with recueing and visual memory as the primary basis, that is codifying into law action taken by the State Board of Education. But when we are asking for reports to be provided, and when we are saying that we want this as a transformational goal, let's be clear. Last year in law, it was that the Department of Education would survey all school districts as to how many of them were using and did still have textbooks and instructional materials that utilized 3Qing. So here we are almost 1 year later, and that survey has not gone out. So to say when we ask for information, it's immediately provided, that absolutely isn't true. We put into law several years ago that at-risk funding, this is what at-risk funding would be used for, only for expenses above and beyond normal classroom. And we have 2, not 1, but 2 legislative post audits saying that school districts are still violating that law. The other component to that law, not only how the money is to be spent for at-risk, but another component is that reports are to be provided for longitudinal, that cohort of kids that are identified by the district as at risk. They are to provide the legislature that tracking and reporting of how long it takes them to get out of that at-risk criteria, and that's never been provided to the legislature. So I appreciate where the guardrails are, but there is nothing wrong with asking for information to be reported as far as progress or where we are with regard to ELA state assessments.
Representative Stocksdale.
I appreciate your remarks, Senator, but I would respectfully disagree. Again, I think that if there is more information that we want, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to make a law to get that. I think we can, again, request the state board come to our committee meetings and report out, and we can ask them questions. And again, I just think by putting this into law, it takes away from the rights and responsibilities of the state board.
All right, with the committee's permission, I would like to add the word progress. Okay, we're in section 2 where it says submit a report to the legislature 3 times per calendar year. I would like to amend that to say submit a progress report to the legislature 3 times per calendar year on ELA assessment progress. Discussion. Representative Stockstill.
Well, I appreciate the attempt there, but again, to me, it is requiring by law that the State Board of Education does something like this. And again, in my opinion, is in their purview and the responsibilities that Kansas voters placed in their court. And I would, again, it's not the progress report. I'd like to see the progress reports, obviously. And, but I think we don't need a law to have that done.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the Literacy Advisory Committee that's going to provide this report. They're the one. So the executive director would be the one, more than likely, that would come and provide the progress report. So that isn't just what's happening in the Department of Education or the Board of Education, but I would assume it would include the progress that's going on as far as instructor training, as far as the pre-service training that's going on at the university level. So when you look at all of the different things that the Literacy Advisory Committee is supposed to be working on, this is them reporting out 3 times a year to the legislature, specifically what's happening and what potential roadblocks there are, what potential legislation might be needed to move forward. So I want to clarify, this is not the Department of Ed or the Board of Education reporting. This would be the Literacy Advisory Committee. It would be the executive director that would provide that report. And if we might, Mr. Chair, could we go back to, did you agree to the 50% or more of the 3rd through 8th graders and then changing the 85 to 90%? Or are we still okay.
And just to echo that, this section 2 refers only, and I'll have the revisor confirm this, refers only to the Literacy Advisory Committee. So this has nothing to do with the state board reporting to us or anything. Section 2 specifically is the Literacy Advisory Committee that will report progress to us, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Not to belabor this point, but again, I think to make sure everyone realizes, so state assessment scores on these 3 dates, we will not have updated scores for those students on each of those dates, but we would have progress on what the Literacy Advisory Committee is doing with the information that they have historically, and then moving forward of how they're trying to increase those. Just wanting to clarify.
Senator Baumgartner.
So did you want to add the term committee progress?
Yes.
You want to add the term committee?
Submit a committee progress report to the legislature 3 times per calendar year.
And that it would also include, yes, you may. Yes, we'll always accede to you.
Thank you. So I'll just let you know what I heard during that discussion, and you can tell me if I missed anything. So you want to submit a progress report to the legislature, and that report would include the state assessment progress, but progress on literacy training for in-service and pre-service teachers, the progress of the literacy committee on the other goals and requirements of the blueprint for literacy.
Further discussion on that change? Okay. Very good. We agree. So moving on to section 4.
You had shared that there was a bit of a difference in 2839. Is that correct with the House version? How is that different on the back page? Oh, okay. We already discussed, we would like to keep what's in, Senate Bill 532 because it does codify into law also a position of the State Board of Education. But we do want to add your nothing in this paragraph should be construed portion as well.
Give us just a second, please.
Mhm.
The House would like to make one change. On or before July 1st, 2025, no school district shall use any textbooks or instructional materials that utilize the three curing system. We would like to add the word or visual memory as the primary basis. Huge changes. We're adding a 2-letter word right there. Discussion, Senator Baumgartner.
Do we have some new revisor language for that?
It is our understanding that the intent of the House is to make sure that the utilization of the three queuing system would not be as the primary basis. Okay. Yep.
And it's queuing, not curing. We wish it would cure, but it doesn't. The Senate is in agreement with that, and as well as the language that you also have.
Correct.
Category. There are two things that we would like to discuss openly with you. Because we know that we have heard concerns not only on the Senate side, but we know that there are concerns on the House side that there was a budget that was submitted as far as cost estimate. It originally came out as 18 million. And then there was discussion of reducing that. But we understand that that there are still some questions about what really is going to be that first year budget requirement. There also, quite frankly, has been an issue that we have talked about on the Senate side with regard to what's in Section 6, which is some requirements for our post-secondary institutions. They are to design and implement 2 3-credit hour applied application courses. And they're required for them to be available and included for approved graduation requirements for anyone earning a degree in elementary education. And that is to be in place so that any graduates next May would have that training. And keep in mind, we are chasing our tail on this because next month we have a whole slew of education graduates that are going to be coming from our universities that will not have had this opportunity for this learning and this training. So they are going to have to circle back and be retrained, or that training is going to have to be augmented in some way. But because we know that creating those 2 courses is a requirement, it has to be implemented. There needs to be a common performance-based assessment, which we have been told is already in place. I'm not quite sure how that assessment has been piloted if the courses haven't been piloted either. So there is some form of assessment that supposedly our 6 Regents institutions are piloting. But again, I would assume that with the creation of the 2 3-credit hour applied application courses, there's going to need to be some modification to that performance-based assessment. There also is supposed to be a development of a micro-credential for our teachers. And these are things that haven't been done yet, haven't been completed. So, having worked in higher education myself, I know what that process is with regard to creating new courses based on new requirements and outcomes that are needed. So we would like to have a clawback. We would like to have clawback language, and I assume it would fit into Section 6. And so I'm going to entertain what that language roughly would be. The reviser would come up with the formal language for us. The funding for research Regents institutions is significantly different from the funding for our 3 regional institutions. So the clawback would be different for those institutions. So my initial proposal is a $1 million clawback for the research institutions and a $500,000 clawback for the regional Regents institution. And that is if they do not meet that August 2024 deadline. It would require, that course has to be up and available for students to enroll in. So they either make the deadline or they don't make the deadline. So that would be the clawback. The other thing is, we know that there were quite a few different things built into what the initial or the preliminary funding would be. And so I would like to have some discussion around that. The 18 million right off the bat seemed to give everyone heartburn. And it should, because when you think about it, we're going from ground zero essentially to forming this committee, hiring an executive director who would have a couple staff members. And there's a whole lot of work to be done between July 1, start of the fiscal year, and when legislature starts the first week of January, which would be obviously a time that there would be some reporting coming to the legislature and some very specific and realistic funding requests would come at that time. So I would like us to have some discussion if we were to, there was some interest in scaling it down to 13 million, still some heartburn. So what is a sweet point that we can live with? Is $10 million. Would that be something that helps get this up off the ground and gets it moving forward, knowing that there would be a report back coming to the legislature in January, when, of course, we would be having preliminary ways and means and appropriations, as well as education committee meetings. So if we could consider those two things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
Could you please explain to me how that 10 million would get spent, like as specifically as you can?
So I have not come up with a breakdown for that. I think that we could come up with a breakdown, but I know that initially there was an ask for the funding that would be for I don't know if it was 2.5 or 3 FTEs. So we'll just say 3 FTEs. We know that there is funding for travel, because we're not going to just take everybody's word for it that, oh yes, we've offered this new course, and oh yes, we have this performance assessment. It's going to be boots on the ground, eyes seeing exactly what is and isn't happening at Regents Institution. So there will be the individuals, so pay, compensation, travel. So that will be one block. Other expenses are going to be, since the courses are going to be made available, my hope is that it's through all of the universities, but there will be tuition. And so if you just graduated last year from one of our Regents institutions and your district says we're jumping on board and we are going to have 100% K through third grade are going to earn these micro credentials, there are going to be people that are going to jump on to start taking this course, at least the first one. I don't think that they can stack them because I think they're progressive. You develop a certain level of skill with the first course, and that continues with the second course. My understanding is it's going to be just like letters isn't stackable. You can't take letters 1 and 2. You have to complete letters 1 before you can start letters 2. So it would be funding for the 3 credit hours for possibly fall semester. I assume you're going to have more taking in spring semester. And then once the micro-credential assessment is determined, there is built in there funding for a $500 stipend for any teacher that achieves that micro-credentialing. So right off the bat, that's off the top of mind. Those are the things that I am anticipating would be expenses. Is that going to equate to $10 million? I think there's a way that you could make it to it. Is that really what we're going to need from July 1 to January 6th or 7th? No, but again, for the fiscal year, I think it would serve us well, and it would allow for folks to even enroll in these courses if they were wanting to take it summer semester, which begins in June. So it would pay for that, those credits to be earned. It would cover the stipend. It would help get this up and going. It may even be some preliminary money should there be a proposal that comes to the legislature to open at least one additional reading center. We know that there is nothing right now that is further west of South Central of Wichita. So I know that there's been conversation. If there were a first new one to be put in place, it would be someplace west of South Central. So that would be my guesstimation on the 10 million. I thought I had the original sheet, but I'm not finding it with me right now.
Representative Estes.
Thank you very much. Do you know how many elementary teachers we have who might get micro-credentials? Around ballpark is fine.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to look for that, but we did receive from the Department of Education, we did receive some documentation that let us know how many kindergarten teachers we have, as well as I think it was K through third grade, but it might be, I'm seeing a head nod. And
The number 27,000 comes to mind. Is that a way off number?
we're going to go ahead, and if one of you can step forward, and we're going to phone a friend right now so we can move forward.
So Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner at State Department of Education. There are 36,000 classroom teachers, K-12. I mean, somewhere in the neighborhood of between 15 and 18,000 would probably be elementary teachers. So that'd be K-5 or 6. I mean, that's would be my best guess off of not looking it up.
Thank you, Frank. Representative Estes.
I'm just going to say thank you, Frank.
So one thing I want to make absolutely clear is the funding isn't, and I think we talked about this, funding is not attached to the bill at this time. It is all subject to appropriations, correct?
That is correct, but because they're in the process of finishing up their work, I think it would be helpful if we would codify at least what we're going to put forward for this first year. I will say, if this is helpful, it may not be, but I know that the original ask included funding to go to universities for the creation of the courses. That is something that I've always spoken against because I feel from an academic standpoint, creating a new course, whether it's because of change in textbook, change in what within a department as far as new requirements for graduation, that is the responsibility of the professors. It was the responsibility for me when I was a professor, when we added a new course, when we changed equipment. It was my responsibility to write all of the new outcomes and objectives for the course. And that was a part of what was approved by the Board of Regents. So writing those, that is the responsibility of the professors and of the colleges of education. You know, the fact of the matter is, it was back in 2018 that we passed the Literacy Task Force. They reported in January of 2019 that these courses needed to change. And since 2019, here we are, almost the very tail end of spring semester for 2024, and those courses still haven't been designed. They had every opportunity to get it done. In fact, Senate Education put seed money in several years ago for any university that developed and changed their curriculum to include the science of reading, and none of them did it. In fact, they only responded that we couldn't make them do it yet. And so, to me, to fund something that is academic integrity is what it is. That is something that is the responsibility of those professors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And the number we're coming up with is somewhere between $7.5 and $9 million would cover the stipends for the teacher, based off the numbers Frank gave us. Is that what you're coming up with that as well, Representative Estes?
Frank, I believe I was told 6,000 teachers are through the process. They've done both, and there's another 6,000 who are halfway through. Is that correct?
So there are 6,000 that we think have completed at least the first part of letters. Also, and there are, just so you know, there are 10,550 K3 teachers.
10,000 what?
10,550 K through third grade teachers. So my guess of 15 to 18,000 K through 6 teachers is probably pretty close. So yes, there are about 6,000 that have already completed the letters training, and then there are still more in process, which we think is probably about the same number. However, some of that was all K through 5 or 6 teachers, and then ELA some of those are ELA teachers in the secondary as well.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you. So have a great new legislative research. And what was shared with us in fall was that there were 10,550 just K through 12 teachers. I said 12, didn't I? I'm reading 3. 10,550 K through 3 teachers. The other component that has never been addressed is special education teachers do not receive any particular training with regard to dyslexia or the science of reading. So when you think about the more complex problems, so students that have more complex dyslexia, so they would be receiving those interventions ideally with an IEP with SPED teachers. But if our SPED teachers, and here's where it gets very difficult, because we're preliminarily talking about K through 12. What that really is doing is it's essentially turning our back on every kid that hasn't been identified as dyslexic or having some type of cognitive reading problem that's going to be entering 4th grade through 12th grade. And so the SPED teachers in middle school and high school, to me, it really is almost a bookend issue. We want to be immediately addressing those kids that are about to start school or starting school and before they get to 3rd grade, because we know how how critical it is at third grade that they can read at the third grade level. But what that creates is we really, from a bookend, need to be working diligently, rapidly with our SPED teachers that are in the secondary, in that high school level, so that they get any possible interventions that might be meaningful before they graduate. So we've got this accordion where we really have to be working from both ends.
Representative Vestas.
Okay, so just to clarify, someone getting a degree in special education in Kansas does not get training in letters currently or science of reading currently?
Senator Baumgartner.
They would not.
Wow.
And keep in mind the two courses that we're talking about for elementary ed teachers, they're not receiving those now yet. That will be starting in the fall. So is that something that needs to be done? That's why some school districts are saying, okay, we want all elementary. Remember when we had that joint meeting with Garden City, I think it was. So we heard what was happening, all elementary teachers. But I don't recall hearing that that was also occurring with all SPED teachers in Garden City. But when we think about it, that's the area that we need to make sure that they receive those services, because we are talking about pull-out services that are going to be needed for these kids that are going to be entering fourth grade. So think about it. We know that right about now, state assessments are occurring. Teachers should already know which kids in third grade are not at third grade level, because they have all those opportunities. The University of Kansas provides those 3 or 4 other formative tests for free for them to use during the school year. So a teacher would know which of their third graders aren't at level. And I remind you, last year, we were at 68% of kids were at grade level. So you're talking about 32% that aren't. Those kids are going to fourth grade next year. And those fourth grade teachers aren't necessarily queued up to receive this training. I do think that since they wouldn't have to out of pocket pay for the courses and there is a stipend for them, I think that's helpful. Now, why would we pay out of pocket for, or why would we pay for tuition? Or why is the Board of Regent or Board of Education paying for letters? Well, a lot of our teachers that are in our classrooms right now, they're still paying student loans. They're still paying student loans, and they still need to be trained for this, and it's critical. So does it seem a little expensive? It does. Even at $10 million, I understand $10 million here in the legislature, we talk like it's quarters, nickels, and dimes. But it's just over 1/3 of what we're paying for a World Cup tournament that's going to be next year. It is our step to formally say status quo isn't working. We have to move forward. And it would be the only organized way that we really can do that. I think 10 million, I think at the end of the fiscal year, you might still see some money remaining that would carry forward. That's a good thing if it's not needed yet. But until the at those higher grades and that training, because that's not really the focus right now. Right now, the focus has been, let's get those 100% of those K through third grade, but we have to be looking at those teachers that are in the high schools. If you are, I'll give you an example because I taught I taught at the high school level, and I was in the English department, but I taught the specialties. I taught theater and drama, debate, forensics, public speaking. At no point in someone's secondary education training, even if you are English, at no point do you receive any reading training. It is not in the curriculum.
Could you give us just a couple minutes on the House side real quick, please?
Um, do you, either you or your phone a friend know how many special ed teachers that this would apply to?
I think we'd have to refer to the Department of Education, but I did receive a couple texts. So I appreciate everyone that's watching, and I appreciate that people are focusing on literacy because it's so critical. But I was reminded we have to include early childhood numbers, the SPED, but also the ESL. And I don't know what those numbers are.
I don't know that off the top, but I will say the 6,000 that have already been trained in letters does include special education teachers. The focus has been, the big focus was K3 and all elementary special education. We've also looked at special education K-12 and then secondary teachers that teach ELA. There are two different types of letters training. One is more intensive, which is intended for the primary grades and special ed. The other one doesn't take as long for the upper grades and secondary. So,
Senator Baumgartner.
But I guess the question before you leave, it would be intensive if you were secondary SPED or what is it? What was the other group? ESL. Yeah.
so yeah, any of the service provider, I mean, ESL and special education would be included, especially, and then mostly just ELA at the secondary level.
Okay, I'm going to turn to my vice chair to help me out on this because I want to make sure I get this right. So we are good with clawback language in section 6. We agree about where the funding should go to. We would like to keep it at 2.5 FTEs. We would like to add special education teachers and then put language in there to make sure none of the funding goes to course development. Representative Estes.
And just to review, I'm going off the list that you articulated, which was the FTE, the travel for on-site tuition for the 2 courses, the cost of creating the micro credential and the $500 stipend.
Senator Baumgartner.
Those were the areas that I identified. I'm not the executive director. I'm not, that advisory committee. They may come up with some things. This is a blueprint. It's not, as I said in one of our hearings, it's not what the carpet or the paint is. So, they will get a chunk of money, and how they spend it is how they spend it. There might be something that I didn't include. And but I think, so I guess the question is, with regard to the funding and these things, we can build that into this bill. Is that correct? For the initial year? Because in section 1 is where we identify that the funding is, what is the language that we use? If you would.
Tamara.
Thank you. So the way that this would be structured in our mind would be there would be a new appropriation section with a line item to the Board of Regents for however much, currently 10 million, it sounds like. And there would also be a clawback proviso included underneath that appropriation. And then for all of the requirements on any of that money, we would put a section in the bill that would be specific to the first year appropriation and list those requirements.
So really the only requirement as of this point would be the language about development. Correct. Okay. Discussion on that? Senator Sykes.
So I need clarification on what we're agreeing to there. If it was the 10 million, you were talking about 2.5 FTE. Are you taking that out? So then my question would be that be the director plus 2.5 FTEs?
I believe it's director plus 1.5. Is that correct? But it would be up to yeah.
It would be up to the regents, so they would have discretion.
Correct.
Interpretation.
Further discussion?
Three FTE, but
Senator Baumgartner.
I don't remember an FTE, but I certainly support. I don't think this isn't going to be a big agency. It's an executive director and whatever staff they need to do the data mining as well as boots on ground. So I think the FTE restriction might be more appropriate after the legislature has received a couple of reports from the executive director.
That's fair. We can agree to that. Further discussion?
I lost that. That's still on.
Yeah. So I believe we agree on the contents of the compromise of 532 and 2839, I believe, right? Senator, Excuse me, Representative Estes.
Thank you. I'd like to have a discussion about adding 2731 to this bill because 2731 kind of takes off where the bill for longitudinal reporting on the State Department's website stops. We see percentages. For example, we just talked about 32% of students who are not proficient. What that bill did was add an actual number to that percentage, so we know exactly how many students we're talking about. And the other thing that it did was put into law, also with real numbers, the post-secondary success report. And I think those are, when we talk about our goals and we talk about getting towards literacy, having that additional information is very valuable.
Okay, so the motion would be to add the contents of 2731 to this
Yes.
before we close out the discussion on 532, Senate Bill 532, correct?
Correct.
Okay, discussion. Senator Sykes.
Thank you. So Tamara, can you talk about the difference? This is a new bill to me. Difference of current law and what is changed in 2731.
Jason.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Sykes. What House Bill 2731 proposed was amending a statute on the statewide assessments to require additional reports of the state board. This included the number of students, both as a whole number percentage of the total number of students who took the statewide assessment in the preceding school year, and that would be disaggregated by core academic area and grade level. And then also in that report would be the percentage of students who took the statewide assessments in 10th grade and then who 2 years post-graduation obtained some post-secondary education. And that would be disaggregated by their achievement level on their statewide assessment in 10th grade. And then I would just point out that the House amended the bill to make those reporting requirements only through school year 28-29. Those reporting requirements would expire on July 1st of 29.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you. So on that information on the post-secondary, can you talk about that a little bit more? So would that be community college, four-year college? Talk about that specific piece of that.
Yes, my understanding is it's similar to what the state board has already been reporting in terms of post-secondary achievement after graduation. I don't know if Representative Estes wants to expand on that.
So it includes if you go off to college, if you get some kind of a job credential, if you go to basic training, although we're having a conversation with the federal government because they don't want to tell you who finished basic training. But just, did anybody do anything that counts towards being college or career ready, fulfilling that goal? Because ultimately, that's a phrase that we use for what we're trying to do with our standards. And to me, it's a very important measure of where we are with those, on, are we being successful? How many of our kids are going? And the commissioner has presented us that information and broken it down by the standardized test score levels, and it's very enlightening, and it really shows where we have room to gain. So to me, I find it very valuable.
Senator Sykes.
Yeah, I appreciate the information. I'm just kind of
Representative Estes.
I cannot address, I just know that this is a system that the state board has and they track, so I don't know if they include that or not, but it is a system, that they use.
Further discussion?
It's aggregated just like the percentages are on the longitudinal reports that you can go in and see on the State Department of Ed website. So if you want to know the exact number of children who are a level 4 or a level 2, you would be able to see that number. Thank you.
Very good. All right. Right now, we're going to pause discussions and we're going to come back to this room at 1:30 and finish up on this bill on 438. So we've agreed to everything so far, I believe. We have. Okay. So with that, we will come back at 1:30, same room, and looking forward to it. Thank you. All right, welcome back. We're going to jump right back into this, kind of pick up where we left off. We were going to discuss the language regarding the Regent centers, and kind of buttoning that up. We were, I believe in the current bill, it says they have to come up with a plan for the 6 regional centers that they then report to us. There was discussion about tightening up that language and making that a little bit stronger. So with that, trying to get the proper verbiage on that. You got any, Representative Estes?
I think we were discussing language that would clarify that this bill doesn't authorize the opening of any of the centers. It authorizes the planning of, but I'm open for discussion on that.
Tamara?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We can sort of mirror language that the House had in 2839, something along the lines of nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize the actual opening of any of these centers.
I had forgotten that was there. But I think that's a good place to start a discussion.
Senator Bumgarner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess what we really need to know is who does ultimately authorize the opening of a center? Is that going to be a Board of Regents recommendation? So it would first be reported to the Board of Regents and then it would come to the legislature. And would it be in the form of, adding that as the funding, a new funding request? So that's my question for the House members.
Yes, that would be a new funding request. Senator Bumgarner.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So I guess one of the things that I think we need to think about is oftentimes a funding request goes to Ways and Means and Appropriations, of which most of us are not on those committees. So a request of something that we're not aware of or we might have concerns about. So I think, that it would be presented to the House and Senate Education Committees for approval to move forward for appropriations, if that makes sense.
Correct. Yeah. Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Yeah, my concern is just, again, as I stated before, I think we have a blueprint and possibilities to do some really good things and not wanting to put limitations. So if they needed to open this and it was in August and they had plans, how when the legislature were here for 90 days, is that going to cause some of that issue? That's my biggest concern, just with the timeline and wanting to make sure that they have the ability to move forward.
Tamara.
Just to clarify, the bill the underlying bill as it exists and the way it exists in this conference only authorizes the Literacy Advisory Committee to develop a plan to establish these 6 regional centers. There is nothing about actually establishing them. There is nothing about approving them. So if you want to add that, it sort of seems like that's the road we're going down, but currently there's nothing about actually establishing these centers.
Senator Sykes.
So if I may, maybe we're trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's before we even have a plan. So maybe that would be better after they kind of initially get the idea of where those would be and then coming back to the legislature next year. And then we could kind of put in those guidelines.
So they come back to the Senate, House, and Senate Ed committees by Senator Bumgarner.
Well, we do have built in there. Is there something already in there?
So The Literacy Advisory Committee is already required, excuse me, to submit a plan to the State Board of Regents and the Legislature on the establishment of the centers on or before January 1 of 2025.
We all did. It's okay. All right. What other discussions do we have on this bill? We have the clawback in there with the 1 million and the 500,000, as you stated, correct? Tamara?
Yes, it was my understanding that this conference committee did agree to appropriate 10 million to the State Board of Regents, and as part of that appropriation, include a proviso that would lapse 1 million for research institutions and 500,000 for regional institutions who did not comply with Section 6, which is the course development by August 2024.
Very good. Further discussion? Very good. I believe we have nothing further either. If you could give the House just 2 minutes, we'll be right back with you, please. That would be the bill where we added service-related injuries. Okay, discussion. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is this in regard to adding a service-connected injury or disability? And if so, can you help me understand what is the obstacle to implementing it with that language?
Because it could make it them gather data or documentation that the death was service related and so forth. So they said they would prefer to go back to the original language that the House offered.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe we changed letter I, died in military service. I don't believe we changed that. It was the injury or disability, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So their message to me was it takes time for us to gather the paperwork. And then that's a little difficult for me to address because I've never seen their paperwork, their intake forms when somebody applies. But I'm guessing the language change makes them feel like they would have to ask for additional documents.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, trying to determine whether the delay or the amount of paperwork required outweighs the benefit of making sure that it's a service-connected injury or disability, I'm just having trouble being able to discern that at this point without further information about the requirements of the paperwork that are changed under this language.
Representative Estes.
I understand. I kind of feel the same way, but I just wanted to pass on the request that I received. So
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that what's unclear to us is when someone is discharged from the military due to an injury. That could be because it was military related or non-military related. But when they are identified as being 50% disabled or 75% disabled, is that based on if it occurred due to the military activity, or would that rating be given to an individual that served in the military if it was a non-military injury?
So if I were trying to, when I look at this, I think of not all injuries get grant a reason assigned to them right away. So if you think about people with Agent Orange, it took decades to get that as a qualified. So I think their concern is that when you go to look back in time, a family member, especially if that person has died already, may not have that paperwork. So I think that's what they're trying to avoid there.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Due to, just the lack of additional information around that, and to be honest, I would think that if a military service member were injured or had an accident of some type, that there would be additional military benefits that would help that service member. This is about a scholarship. And so I think it's important that talking about a scholarship that it is connected directly to a service member's service and, not broader than that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Baumgartner.
Well, I appreciate that K-Board reached out to you on this. They didn't reach out to anyone on the Senate side. We did discuss this kind of at length in committee. And that's why we amended it in that way. And so, so right now we're going to respectfully decline. If it means a little extra paperwork, then we need to do that because this is above and beyond. With regard to this scholarship is above and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Moving on. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I think we are good here. All right. Very good. All right, we're agreed. Thank you, committee.